Hello, my name is Fred Banker, and I wanted to talk about my last video and mainly the response to it. Basically, I have had comments saying that they see the war in Iran as unnecessary and they do not see why America needs to get involved. Personally, I think they need to get involved because we need to clean up the mess that we made nearly 50 years ago. Because under Jimmy Carter, we allowed the Islamists, basically, in Iran to take over from the monarchy and from the leftists in Iran, which had allowed not only the betrayal of the leftists, as 30,000 left wing revolutionaries were arrested and executed, but also a betrayal of the Iranian people in general, as for nearly 50 years they've lived under the boot of an authoritarian dictatorship with little ways of relieving that stress unless they want to flee the country. I think it's also important to note how lenient the American government has been to the Iranian regime. Basically, over the course of nearly 50 years, we have tried to normalize relations with Iran, and we have tried to push for them to kind of modernize in terms of their politics. The problem is that with their connections, mainly with Russia and China, Iran never needed to modernize. They will talk about the moderates in the government, but that's basically in terms of trying to deceive, in terms of trying to get people to believe that Iran can modernize, but in fact, the reason why they can't is because they are led by a theocratic dictatorship, a class of fanatics known as the mullahs, and they have done near irreparable damage to their country, and due to their fanaticism, due to them wanting to basically wage a global war, a global spiritual war, also known as a jihad, against Israel, America, and much of the Western world, you could see why I don't believe they deserve a nuclear weapon. Because they have acquired the uranium to get it. They've acquired so much that they can make multiple nuclear warheads, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've acquired up to 408 kilograms of uranium, which is enough to make 3 nuclear warheads, and that was as of 2025. And I think that's important to point out because a lot of people will say that there is no nuclear weapon, that there is no means for Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But the fact of the matter is, and that's not even bringing up the Joint Comprehensive Plan in 2015, which was supposed to limit Iran's nuclear enrichment in exchange for $150 billion in frozen assets being thawed out by the United States government, which, as we now know, has not slowed down Iran's search for a nuclear weapon, and it is more than likely that Iran simply used that money to fund their nuclear research even further. Is that Iran wants that in the cards. Iran wants that to enforce their will onto the Middle East. And as we've seen with attacks against their neighbors, UAE in general, especially, I think it's important to realize that a belligerent state like the Islamic regime of Iran does not need or deserve a nuclear weapon. Because as we've seen in North Korea, for example, they have a nuclear weapon, and they have done nothing but act belligerently with their threat of using nuclear force against their neighbors, mainly South Korea, Japan, and America. I believe we do not need to make that same mistake with Iran. And in terms of what Iran has done to the United States directly, in short terms, they have funded multiple terrorist organizations to attack United States officials, most infamously in 1983 in Beirut, in both a barracks and in the U.S. Embassy, in which the attacks accounted for hundreds of Americans dead and several dozen injured. Not to mention, currently, organizations such as Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, and the Houthis have also caused damage and death to American soldiers and Americans in general in that area. Not to mention the other people that they have attacked in the Middle East, Arabs, and especially Sunnis, given that Iran is run by a sect known as the Shia in Islam. And what that means is, that might be a video for another time, but to put it simply, the Shia and the Sunni are the two biggest sects in Islam. Both are still opposed to each other, but Iran seeks to act as a counter to Saudi Arabia, who are the main Sunni country in the Middle East. And this war, this religious war, or series of religious proxy wars, I should say, has, like I said, caused unnecessary amount of death and destruction, and has turned what potentially could be a very profitable and very prosperous region, that in the Middle East, has been a distant memory thanks to countries like Iran, thanks to governments like the Islamic regime of Iran that have done damage to their people, damage to the United States, and damage to their neighbors. And a nation that acts with such tendencies to be a warmonger is a nation that I do not trust with a nuclear weapon, that should not be trusted in terms of letting this war end in a white peace, basically to just let things just end with the status quo. Because at the end of the day, they know that what causes war was the death of thousands of their own people due to the protest, and as we speak, more protesters are being executed in Iran, and I am sure that if the Islamic regime in Iran still stands, that more protesters will be executed, and it will be nothing more than a bloodbath in the streets of places like Tehran, Isfahan, and many other cities in the country. I've understood, even before the war started, that this would not be an easy war. I never said it would be. But what I'm saying is that when you have a people that cannot defend themselves against a government that has had a history of waging needless conflicts while their people are crying out for help from the United States, there comes a time when you have to do a job that is hard, and you have to say, the hard part out loud. I understand people's disagreements. I understand their positions on this issue, but it's hard for me to look at this and not see what is blatantly there in the fact that Iran is the root cause of terrorism, Islamic terrorism to be exact, and has caused needless pain and suffering throughout the world. And I think that if we do have the means to stop it, then it should be stopped. Because let's not act as if Iran and America have been in war, but behind closed doors, or at least in terms of a quiet war, a war that basically they're not going to say that they've declared war, but in terms of the fact that Iran has helped Al Qaeda and other Iraqi insurgencies during our time in the war, in the Iraq War, or the fact that they've helped Hamas and helped them garner the strength to take on Israel during the Israeli-Palestinian conflict of the 2020s, given the fact that they have funded most of the terrorism that has occurred throughout the world in the past 47 years. It's hard for me to ignore the fact that a war like this was going to happen in the first place, and that a war like this needed to happen. Because I know that some people will say that, will ask me, well, my book, is going to be about, an anti-war book, trying to dissuade China and America from going to war with each other. And I understand the idea, and I understand the skepticism, but you got to understand that while I have my disagreements with China, obviously, their government can be just as cruel as Iran is sometimes. I think really it runs down to leadership. China, while being authoritarian, is led by pragmatists. It's being led by people who at least understand the world stage while propping up this ultra-nationalistic view of China, or what they see as China. What China's border should be, how they view Taiwan, how they view the South China Sea. They at least understand that it's going to take time to kind of have the necessary parts to have the kind of empire that China wants. That's why they try to deal with diplomacy, trade, that sort of deal. And though I may have my disagreements, and though China can act shady and have been acting shady lately, I am not going to say that there isn't a chance for China to change their ways internally. The issue with Iran, however, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is that from the root, they have not had that time of modernization, as I've said. They have not had the chance to grow and improve and reform as a governing party. What they have done is strengthen their iron grip on the nation of Iran, and have treated their people horribly, and decided to project that power onto the Middle East and, to a lesser extent, the world. Because for all I and many others have complained about China, they at least have some semblance of wanting to work and cooperate with the world. There's at least a basis, a framework where they can cooperate with the powers of the world. Iran does not have that framework, and it's very likely they will not have that framework in the future if the Islamic regime of Iran continues to function after this war. It is important to realize that what my book and my philosophy on war is basically that it should be used as a last resort. It should be used when all other means have been exercised and should be exhausted. And I do believe that over the course of nearly 50 years, that all our means of peace, diplomacy, and deals have been exhausted. It is a phrase that nobody wants to hear, but it needs to be said. Because I feel like the decades of deals and policy making with Iran has been memory holed by the general public. And I don't blame them, hard to keep up with everything going on in the world, but it needs to be said clear that Iran has treated its people in a way that is inhumane and cruel, and has shown off this cruelty to the world and are proud about it. This isn't as if this cruelty were to happen in America, France, the UK, or Germany, where there would at least be a trial to help. I understand that people are not a fan of this war and are especially not a fan of how Trump approaches it, but I do think that we need to move in the right direction in terms of how we approach Iran, because we have cultivated a culture of vindication for them. We have given them a psychology and appeasement, basically, in which Iran can basically threaten and attack however they please, and they can always get little by little bit of whatever they wanted. And I think Trump is moving in the right direction in telling them that they're not going to get everything that they want, that those days are over. And I think that's an important thing to look into, an important thing to approach, because I think that people tend to look at the status quo of American and Iranian relations and thought that things were moving slowly but surely into the right direction. But personally, it's only been up until recently that I feel like America has finally done what it needs to do and clean up its mess in the region. Because what they have unleashed is what's basically a terror organization in disguise of a government that has threatened the region of the Middle East, has threatened the world, has threatened to impose their will onto countless people as they mow down anyone that gets in their way. And I think it's important that we put an end to it. And I think that since we did let the Ayatollah back in 1979, as we allowed him to take over Iran, that it is quite fitting that we pay the debt for our sins, basically, or at least for our mistakes. Again, I understand that some people have their issues, have their grievances with this war, but in the end of the day, this war, unlike others, have become necessary through the failure of Iran to fully modernize in terms of a political organization, and basically the failure of America and to a lesser extent other nations to handle them, or at least to put deterrents on them to stop them from doing their attacks, which has not happened, and from what I can see from what I've been able to see, can only continue thanks to, silence, thanks to people just ignoring it. And it's kind of funny, at least to me, because unlike many other people who, as far as the war's going on, the more people are dissuaded by it, do not want to fight anymore, the more I feel like we need to fight it. Because it seems to me that thanks to European silence and support by countries like Russia and China, Iran can get away with anything. Get away with murdering their civilians just for protesting, get away with getting a nuclear weapon, get away with terrorizing the region for however long they please. Just as long as there's cheap oil, Europe and Russia and China, they would just let Iran do whatever they want. And like I said, I have my own grievances with the Trump presidency, but like I said, sometimes there needs to be a way to stop these organizations from harming the rest of the world. Because when all forms of diplomacy and peace fail, then there needs to be action. The Islamic regime is our mess, and it must be fixed. It must be cleaned up, and it's not going to be easy. I understand people's concerns, skepticism, and fear. But at the end of the day, there is so far only one course of action that Iran wants to hear and that the Islamic regime wants to meet. And with talks of the ceasefire winding down between the United States and Iran, I see it more as that the war will continue for the time being. I hope this war ends quickly. I hope the war ends with a more peaceful, more prosperous Iran, one that is free from the shackles of tyranny. And may the people of Iran, after the war, have the means to fight tyranny on their own terms and do not have to rely on the United States nor any other foreign nation to defend themselves. For it is with the right to bear arms that the Iranian people can be more free than they have been in the past nearly 5 decades. But let me know in the comments below what you think, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Stay blessed.